Hi, and we're back. Hi, and we're back. And we're talking about. Hi, and we're back. And we're talking about the different features of cost leadership and differentiation strategies. We just got through the ones for cost leadership. Now let's look at the key strategy elements and resource and organizational requirements for differentiation strategy. So for differentiation strategy, the key strategy elements, it's not about efficient manufacturing. It's about, trying to create a strong brand. So there's an emphasis on branding and brand advertising, designing a cool product, an innovative product, about providing good service and high quality. So the key resource and organizational requirements are, it's more about marketing, as you can probably understand, right? Marketing is all about building strong brands. And instead of process engineering skills, that is, instead of, in a cost leadership where we said, try to streamline the process, make the process more efficient, here we're trying to make, the innovative products. So it's all about product engineering and creativity, high investments in research and development, right? Strong product R&D, flexibility, and more about qualitative measurement and incentives, strong cross-functional coordination. So it sounds a little bit more like, Google might take in their approach, maybe less mechanistic hierarchy and more of an organic hierarchy, right? So more, emphasizing creativity and cross-functional teams, and strong marketing and branding. So for cost differentiation, some examples, it's like the ones we can talk about are companies like Tata, the Nano. This is the lowest cost production car in the world. It's something like $2,000. It's mainly marketed in India. Walmart is an obvious example, right? The emphasis on always low prices, always. And they achieve these low prices through the, tight control of their, inventory, logistics, all these things. Actually, this Walmart case is coming up, so we'll talk about it more then. IKEA, right? They don't even assemble their products. They leave that to the customers to do it themselves. That's another great example. In Turkey, we have A101 and BIM, right? They have really streamlined their operations. You look inside their stores, it's very, what we might call Spartan, very limited in terms of the decorations, limited in terms of service too, right? You kind of wait online longer. Sometimes they don't even take things out of the boxes. So like with BIM, you can see that, the boxes themselves are kind of made to just use as displays. So it really reduces their costs. We talked about Redbox, right? Putting these kind of, little rental boxes. These are actually, I think, the collection boxes, but you can order them through the mail, and they get delivered, and then you just return them in these boxes. Southwest Airlines is another great example, right? About, lowering costs. So here's on the left side, this column is the cost column, the cost components. And then it's a comparison between Southwest Airlines and United Airlines in terms of the costs per available seat mile. Okay, so that's just one way of standardizing the costs between two different airlines. And if you look, Southwest Airlines pays lower wages and benefits. Okay, that's a major cost component. Aircraft, they also have lower costs, right? They only have 737 aircraft, no other type, so it kind of, decreases. They're able to buy larger quantities. They pay lower commissions on ticket sales. They do not offer any food and beverages on their flights, so it's zero cost. And then there's, other costs, perhaps, some other issues, but then overall, they're able to reduce their, cost per seat mile to 6.9 cents compared to United Airlines, which is a full service airline, at 10.5 cents. Now, Porter, when he talks about these cost leadership and differentiation approaches to competitive advantage, he warns that you should not get stuck in the middle. He says, the firm stuck in the middle is almost guaranteed low profitability. It either loses the high volume customers who demand low prices, or must bid away, kind of give away its profits to get this business from the low cost firms. They have to kind of offer, low prices, which affects their profit margins, to get that business from the firms that are already low cost. But it also loses the high margin business, the cream of the crop, the cream, to the firms who are focused on high margin targets, or who have achieved differentiation overall. So in other words, he's saying, don't get stuck in the middle between the cost, the low cost approach and the differentiation approach, because you have to just choose one and do it well. Otherwise, you end up kind of getting stuck in the middle and not being profitable. But interestingly, if we examine this has actually been examined in some past research. So if you look at the performance on the left, the performance in terms of return on investment, sales growth, and gain in market share, right? And these are different companies, so the sample size is listed at the bottom, in the bottom row. And they look at different companies that are specifically following these different approaches. The differentiation approach, the firms that follow differentiation have the highest performance in terms of return on investment, which is almost 33%. And then you can see in sales growth, 13.5, gain in market share, 5.3. If we look at the cost approach, also high performance, right? 30.2, 13.5, 5.5. And at the bottom, of course, the sample is 100 companies. If we look at a focused approach, right? So this is the narrow scope, differentiation focus and cost focus. They also have, it looks like a slightly lower performance, but still higher sales growth, higher gains in market share. But then if you look at stuck in the middle, this gives the lowest performance overall, right? The overall return on investment is relatively low. It's the lowest in terms of sales growth and the lowest in terms of gains in market share. But interestingly, this is something interesting from this research, is that a company that pursues both differentiation and cost, what do you think they do? Well, we just said that getting stuck in the middle gives lowest profitability, but here these firms are not pursuing a strategy where they're stuck, where they're not going after cost focus and differentiation focused kind of in a not a very committing way, but in this differentiation and cost approach, it's actually what some might call a hybrid strategy. They're kind of doing both. They're doing both and doing both well. That is, for example, well, let me just show you the numbers first. The return on investment is actually the highest. And sales growth is quite good, and so is the gains in market share. This is not getting stuck in the middle. This is actually saying, well, we're going to pursue like a differentiation strategy, but at the same time, we're not going to ignore lowering our costs or trying to be most cost efficient. This is actually quite intuitive. You would think that this is the way that you should do things, right? Just because you're going after a strong brand, you're trying to build brand equity, doesn't mean you should just ignore costs, right? You want to try to still lower your costs, be most efficient as you can. A company like McDonald's might, might be a good example for that approach, where they're still very efficient, but they still try to build a strong brand. Even Sutash, would be something like this, right? They're still branding, they're still trying to create strong brands, but they are really super efficient in terms of their logistics management, and super focused on cost. But they're not the low cost producer. They're not the absolute lowest cost, right? They're still investing in brands, they're still investing in good product quality innovation, but at the same time they're trying to streamline their costs. So let's look now at the drivers of cost advantage, and we'll just go through this list and I'll give you some examples. Here, one main driver is this economies of scale. You all know what economies of scale are by now. With economies of scale, some things that help drive that as well is the division of labor. Remember, we talked about being able to specialize and divide labor. Well, in larger companies that can gain from economies of scale, you have very specialized labor. In smaller companies, typically, one person might do many different tasks. You wear many different hats in startup companies or smaller companies. But in large companies that gain economies of scale, you do have this specialization and division of labor. We also have what are known as technical input-output relationships. I think I might have an example here, yeah. So imagine a technical input-output relationship just says, what's the cost of the input versus the amount of output, value of the output that you get. So if you buy a large container, right? Like say the bidon, this what do you call this? I forget the word in Turkish. Darn it. Come on, I can't remember. Anyway, these large, water bottles. If you buy one of those, right, the cost per liter is very low compared to buying, many like the equivalent 1 liter bottles is much more expensive, right? So the volume of water, the value of the water that you get is the same as the value in terms of the output of the water, right? But the cost is much lower. So, for example, in manufacturing, buying a 5,000 liter manufacturing container, to buy like a huge vat, to produce something, like say we're producing some liquid, output, like we're making hand sanitizer, to be apropos. It's cheaper to buy a 5,000 liter container and be able to use that on a large scale than to, if you're a smaller company and you're like, well, we're going to buy a 500 liter, that's all we can afford, and we're going to have to make, hand sanitizers. You can imagine that the economies of scale, you get lower costs because of buying large, one large production unit and making lots and lots and lots of stuff with that, because it's a lower cost per unit, right? Instead of buying 10 500 liter, vats, buying one 5,000 liter is much cheaper in terms of what it can produce, right? And it's the same thing for other things, not just, these containers, but rent, having a, Erolku, for example, the big, or like a Carrefour, having one large, huge shopping center, the cost per meter in rent or in buying it, in land cost, is cheaper, right? When I come back, I'll talk to you about the indivisibilities. That's another issue itself. I'm running out of time here in my 15 minutes, so I'll come back and tell you about that.